All right, let's be honest. You see it on the fish finder, that big, deep hole in the middle of the lake. This is it, you think. The mother lode, the secret winter hideout where every giant bream in the system is packed together. You spend hours drilling holes, dropping bait, and you get nothing. So here's a hard question. Are you a fishing genius who found their wintering grounds, or did you just find a useless, empty pit? I'm going to tell you right now, 99% of the time, it's just a pit. In this video, I'm going to show you why that perfect spot is a lie and how to find the places the bream actually are. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will probably make you question every spot you've ever fished in the winter. So let me ask you, have you ever had a can't miss spot that completely failed you? Let me know.
For generations, the advice has been the same. In winter, fish deep. It's simple, it's easy to remember, and it makes a certain kind of sense. The water is warmer at the bottom, the fish are lethargic, so they must all be piled up in the deepest holes they can find. And this idea gets passed down from father to son, from one fishing buddy to another. We buy expensive electronics, sonar units and GPS maps, and what do we look for first? The deepest contour lines. It becomes a habit, an automatic response to the cold. We see depth, and our brain screams, "Fish here!" The problem is, this is a massive oversimplification. It's a rule of thumb that ignores the most critical factors that actually govern a fish's life: food, safety, and energy conservation. We keep drilling over these same community holes year after year because it's what we were taught, and when it doesn't work, we just blame the weather or the barometric pressure. It's time to break that cycle. First, let's clearly define what I call a random deep hole. Imagine a big, perfectly round bowl in the middle of a kitchen table. That's what most of these spots are underwater. On your sonar, it looks impressive, a sudden, dramatic drop from 20 feet down to 35 or 40. On a contour map, it's a tight circle of lines. The bottom is often soft, silty, and completely featureless. It's a geological depression and nothing more. There's no structure, no change in bottom hardness, no reason for a food source to accumulate there. It's the underwater equivalent of a barren parking lot. Fish might pass through it, but they have absolutely no reason to stay. Think about it from a bream's perspective. Why would they choose to sit in an empty room when there are better places nearby? These holes are traps, not for fish, but for fishermen. They look so obvious and promising on our screens that we get fixated on them, completely ignoring the more subtle, productive areas just 100 yards away. The first step to catching more fish is learning to recognize these traps for what they are and having the discipline to ignore them. Now let's talk about a true wintering pit, or what I prefer to call a staging area. This is a fundamentally different type of spot, and depth is only one part of the equation. A true staging area is a deep spot that has a purpose. It's connected to something. It's not a bowl, it's more like a crossroads or a neighborhood. The key differentiator is structure and complexity. A great wintering spot might be an old, submerged river channel that winds its way through a flat. It might be a deep hole that has a sunken forest of trees on one side of it, or a sharp, rocky ledge along its edge. On the fish finder, you're not looking for just a V shape. You're looking for irregularities. You want to see that depth, yes, but you also want to see humps, bumps, and changes in the bottom reading that indicate a transition from soft mud to hard gravel or rock. These features are what attract and hold fish. They provide cover from predators, they create current breaks, and most importantly, they are magnets for the tiny invertebrates and larvae that bream feed on all winter. A hole is just geography, a staging area is a habitat. Let's dig deeper into the most important factor of all, food. A bream, even a lethargic winter bream, will not stay in a location that doesn't offer a reliable food source. It's a simple law of nature. Those barren, bowl-shaped holes we talked about often have a soft, silty bottom where decomposition uses up oxygen, making it a poor environment for the aquatic life that bream eat, like bloodworms and other insect larvae. These food sources thrive in areas with a harder bottom, a bit of subtle current, or near decaying structure like wood. So when you're looking at your sonar, don't just stare at the depth number. Pay close attention to the bottom return signal. A thin, sharp line indicates a hard bottom, sand, gravel, or rock. A thick, mushy-looking line indicates soft muck. A true Bream hotspot will almost always be a deep area that is right next to or contains sections of a harder bottom. The Bream might rest in the deeper, softer part, but they will position themselves so they can easily move a few feet to the pantry on the harder bottom to feed. If you find a 40-foot hole with a completely soft bottom, it's a food desert. Find a 30-foot hole with a hard bottom shelf next to it, and you've likely found a restaurant. Now for a big myth I want to bust, the oxygen myth. We're often told that fish go deep in winter because the water at the very bottom, right near freezing, is the most oxygen-rich. While deep water does hold oxygen well, this isn't the whole story, especially in smaller or highly fertile lakes. In some bodies of water, the deepest part of the lake can actually become oxygen-deprived or anoxic during the winter. This happens when there's a lot of decaying organic matter, weeds, leaves, and silt, on the bottom. The decomposition process consumes huge amounts of dissolved oxygen. Fish finders can't measure oxygen levels. You might mark a giant school of fish suspended 10 feet off the bottom in a 40-foot hole and assume they're bream. But they could be baitfish or another species tolerant of low oxygen, while the bream are actually holding much shallower, say in 15 or 20 feet of water, where the oxygen is better. Don't blindly trust that the deepest water is the best water. The fish will always prioritize good oxygen levels over raw depth. This is another reason why those featureless, mucky basins are often lifeless. Let's focus on the power of structure. Structure is anything that breaks up the monotony of the lake bed. It can be a fallen tree, a beaver lodge, a rock pile, an old roadbed, or a sharp drop-off. To a winter bream, structure is everything. It represents safety and opportunity. A simple, deep hole is like an open field. It offers no protection. Predators like pike or walleye can easily patrol these areas, but a deep hole that has a large, sunken tree in it, now that's a 5-star hotel. The bream can tuck themselves into the branches, feeling secure from anything that wants to eat them. More than just safety, this structure acts as a food magnet. Algae grows on the wood, which attracts tiny invertebrates, which in turn attracts minnows and the bream themselves. The same principle applies to a sharp ledge or a drop-off. The bream can sit in the security of the deep water at the base of the ledge, and then move up the ledge to feed on whatever is living on that vertical surface. So, when you're studying your lake map, stop looking for the big, round circles. Start looking for the deep spots that are right next to jagged lines, submerged wood symbols, or old creek channels. That's where you'll find the fish. Something that almost no ice fisherman talks about is current. Even in a lake that appears perfectly still, there is almost always some form of subtle, slow-moving underwater current, often driven by wind or springs. This current, no matter how slight, acts like a conveyor belt for food. It concentrates microscopic organisms and tiny food particles into specific areas. A random, bowl-shaped hole is often a dead zone with completely static water. Food doesn't collect there. But think about the outside bend of a submerged river channel. The current will naturally sweep along that edge, depositing food and creating a perfect feeding lane. Bream are incredibly smart about conserving energy. They will position themselves just out of the main flow, in an eddy or behind a piece of structure, and wait for the current to bring dinner right to them. Your job is to identify these potential current-driven locations. These spots are rarely the absolute deepest part of the lake, but they are almost always more productive. If you're fishing a spot and your line hangs perfectly vertical all day, you're likely in still water. If you notice a very slight, consistent bow in your line, you might have just found one of these subtle food delivery highways. Here is a critical piece of advice that will change your results. Stop fishing the very bottom of the hole. For some reason, anglers have this obsession with being in the absolute deepest spot possible. We find a 40-foot hole and we drill our hole right in the center. In reality, the most active feeding fish are almost always located on the transition zones, meaning the edges of that hole. I'm talking about the breaklines, the areas where the bottom slope changes. For example, the fish might be holding right where the lake bottom transitions from a gentle slope to a steep drop, or they might be on the lip of the hole where the steep drop begins to flatten out again at the bottom. These breaklines are travel corridors and feeding shelves. Bream will rest in the safety of the deep water, and when they decide to feed, they will move up onto these edges. By drilling your holes along the perimeter of the deep structure, not in the middle of it, you dramatically increase your chances of intercepting these active fish. Use your GPS and map to drill a pattern of holes that zigzags across the breaklines, from shallow to deep, until you find the exact depth they are using that day. You need to learn to read your fish finder for more than just depth and little red arches. Your sonar is telling you a story about the bottom, and you need to learn the language. I mentioned bottom hardness before, but let's get specific. On most color sonars, a hard bottom like rock or gravel will show up as a thin, bright red or yellow line. A soft, mucky bottom will be a much thicker, less intense line, often blue or a dull orange. A really great sign is when you see a mix, a band of red right next to a band of blue. This indicates a transition zone, which is a fish magnet. Another thing to look for is separation. If you mark fish, are they glued to the very bottom, or are they suspended an inch or two above it? Bream holding on a hard bottom often appear right on the bottom. In a soft-bottomed area, they will almost always be suspended slightly above the sill. If you see fish suspended 5 or 10 feet up in the water column in the middle of a deep hole, they are often inactive, or they might not even be bream. The most catchable fish are those relating tightly to the bottom on or near these key transition areas. Let's not forget about the rest of the food chain. Bream aren't alone down there. Their location is heavily influenced by the presence of baitfish, like shiners, and predators, like walleye and pike. If you find a massive cloud of baitfish suspended in the middle of a deep basin, the bream are unlikely to be right underneath them. They will often be off to the side, relating to nearby structure, trying to avoid the chaos and the attention of predators that are chasing that bait. Use the baitfish as a clue. Their presence tells you that this general area is productive and has a food source. But instead of fishing directly in the bait ball, look for the closest piece of significant structure, a point, a ledge, a rock pile. That's likely where the larger, smarter bream will be holding, picking off stray minnows without putting themselves in the middle of the danger zone. Finding bait is a good sign, but it's not the final destination. It's a signpost pointing you toward the real bream habitat nearby. Think of it as finding a busy food court. The bream are in the quiet restaurant next door. I want to paint a picture for you of a classic trap hole that exists on a lake I fish often. On the map, it's perfect. It's the largest, deepest basin for miles, dropping to over 50 feet. Every weekend, you'll see a dozen ice huts set up right in the middle of it. Everyone who looks at a map for the first time says, that's where the fish must be. But here's the reality. That hole is a biological desert. The bottom is a uniform bowl of deep, oxygen-poor silt. There is zero structure, no rocks, no wood, no contour. I've dropped an underwater camera down there, and it's like looking at a moonscape. It's lifeless. The people who fish there might occasionally catch a small, random perch that wanders through, and that tiny bit of reinforcement is enough to make them believe they're in the right spot. They'll spend 8 hours in the cold for one tiny fish, while just 300 yards away there's a subtle 25-foot deep trough with a hard bottom and some stumps that is absolutely loaded with big bream. The trap hole is easy to find, but the real hotspot takes a little more interpretation. Now let me describe the opposite. A real-life winter bream hotspot. This spot on a map looks completely unremarkable. It's a long underwater point that slowly tapers out from shore. For most of its length, it's a boring 15-foot deep flat. But right at the very tip of the point, it drops suddenly from 15 feet to 25 feet and then into a 30-foot trough. The key is not just the drop, it's that the edge of the drop is littered with rocks and a few sunken logs. The bream don't sit in the 30-foot trough all day. Instead, they school up right on the lip of that drop-off in about 24 feet of water. They use the deep trough as a sanctuary and a safe travel route, but they live and feed on that rocky, structured edge. You could fish 100 feet away in the deepest part of the trough and never get a bite. But if you drill your holes precisely on that break line, where the sonar shows the bottom changing from soft to hard, and where the structure is, it's a fish every single drop. This spot isn't the deepest on the lake, but it's the best because it offers everything a bream needs: safety, structure, and a readily available food source. Think of a good wintering location not as a single spot, but as a neighborhood. A truly great area has all the amenities a bream needs within a short swimming distance. The house is the deep water, the sanctuary where they can rest and feel safe. This might be the 30-foot hole. The kitchen is a nearby shallow flat with weeds or a hard bottom where they can move up to feed, especially during low-light periods at dawn and dusk. The fences or roadways are the break lines and transition zones that connect these areas. A bream wants to be able to move from its safe resting area to its feeding area without expending a ton of energy and without exposing itself to predators. An isolated deep hole in the middle of nowhere doesn't offer this. It's a house with no kitchen and no roads. When you look at your map, try to find these complete neighborhoods. Look for deep water that is directly adjacent to a large, shallow flat. Look for an old river channel that connects a deep basin to a structured point. When you find a place that has all these elements in close proximity, you haven't just found a spot, you've found their entire winter home range. Another massive mistake anglers make is thinking that winter bream are completely stationary. They get on a spot, mark a few fish, and then sit there for 8 hours, expecting the fish to bite eventually. But bream, even in the cold, still move. Their movements are just slower and more deliberate. They have daily migration patterns. A classic pattern is for a school to hold in the deepest part of a structure during the bright, midday hours when predator activity might be highest. Then, as the sun begins to set, they will slowly move up the structure onto an adjacent flat or shelf to feed. If you're sitting in 30 feet of water at 4 p.m., you might be fishing empty water because the entire school has moved up into 15 feet. You have to be willing to move and adjust throughout the day. Don't get anchored to a single hole. If the bite dies, it doesn't always mean the fish stopped feeding. It might mean they've simply moved 20 yards to the left or 10 feet shallower. Keep drilling, stay mobile, and try to follow the school as it goes through its daily routine. The angler who sits still all day is waiting for luck. The angler who moves is making their own. You also need to consider the seasonal progression. A spot that is phenomenal in early winter during first ice might be completely dead by midwinter. This happens for a few reasons. In early winter, any remaining green weeds still produce a little bit of oxygen and hold small insects, so bream might relate to deep weed edges. By February, those weeds are brown, dead, and decaying, actually consuming oxygen. The fish will abandon these areas and move to rock or gravel structures that provide better water quality. Also, as the winter goes on, fishing pressure can educate the fish. That obvious community hole that produced for everyone in December gets fished so hard that the surviving bream either become extremely wary or they move to a secondary, less obvious location. You have to adapt your strategy as the season changes. Don't assume your early ice hotspot will still be a hotspot 2 months later. Always be exploring and looking for those late-season areas, which are often related to harder bottoms or areas with potential spring inflow, which brings in fresh, oxygenated water. Don't forget about the neighbors, and I'm talking about the toothy ones. The presence of large predators like pike, muskie, or walleye can dramatically affect where and how bream set up. If a deep hole is a primary hunting ground for big pike, the bream may avoid it altogether, or they will bury themselves so deep into any available cover that they are nearly impossible to catch. You might mark them on the sonar, but they will have locked jaw. Sometimes the best bream spots are actually in slightly less deep water that doesn't hold as many large predators. It's a trade-off for them between ideal depth and safety. If you're fishing a spot and you keep getting bitten off, or you see large predatory arches on your sonar, that could be a clue as to why the bream bite is so tough. You may be better off looking for a similar piece of structure in a different part of the lake that isn't such a popular hunting ground. The biggest bream in the lake are survivors. They didn't get big by hanging out in the most dangerous places. Let's kill the myth of the single magic hole. Too many fishermen are looking for that one secret spot, that one 8-inch hole in the ice that will produce all day long. That's not how it works. A wintering area, as we've discussed, is an area. It might be the size of a football field. The school of bream is not static within that area. They are constantly moving and repositioning. They might be on the north side of the rock pile in the morning and the south side in the afternoon. They might be holding in 22 feet of water for an hour and then drop down to 26 feet. This is why a run and gun approach is so effective. You need to drill a lot of holes before you start fishing. Grid the entire piece of structure. Drill holes every 10 to 15 feet, covering different depths and different sides of the structure. Then you can move quickly from hole to hole, dropping your transducer in each one to look for fish. This allows you to find the fish rather than waiting for the fish to find you. The guy who drills 50 holes and fishes for 10 minutes in each one will almost always outfish the guy who drills 3 holes and sits on them all day. If you really want to know the truth about a spot, there is no better tool than an underwater camera. A sonar is great. It's your eyes in the dark, but it only gives you a 2-dimensional interpretation of what's below. A camera tells the whole story. You can drop a camera down that perfect deep hole and see for yourself that the bottom is a barren wasteland of silt. There are no weeds, no rocks, and no fish. It's an immediate confirmation that you need to move. Then you can go to a more subtle spot, that little inside turn, on a brake line, and drop the camera. Suddenly your screen is filled with life. You can see the rocks on the bottom, you can see the bloodworm burrows, and most importantly, you can see a school of 50 big bream milling around. A camera removes all the guesswork. It allows you to confirm the bottom composition your sonar is telling you about, and it shows you exactly how the fish are positioned on the structure. It's the ultimate learning tool for understanding what makes a good spot tick, and it will save you countless hours of fishing in dead water. We have to talk about fishing pressure. In the age of GPS maps and social media, there are no more secrets. If there is an obvious deep hole on your lake, you can bet that 100 other anglers know about it too. These community holes get hammered with pressure from the first day of safe ice until the last. The fish in these spots see every type of jig and bait imaginable. They become incredibly difficult to catch, or they may even relocate to escape the constant commotion. The real sanctuaries, the spots that hold big, unpressured fish, are almost always more subtle. They are the secondary spots. It's not the main 60-foot basin, it's the smaller 40-foot trench a quarter-mile away. It's not the giant, obvious underwater point, it's the small, isolated hump that doesn't look like much on the map. To find these places, you have to be willing to ignore the crowd. Look where nobody else is looking. Use your map to find these less obvious features and go investigate them. The reward for finding your own unpressured school of fish is far greater than catching 1 or 2 educated fish from a community hole. Ultimately, you need to learn to think like a bream. It sounds silly, but it's the most important skill you can develop. A fish is driven by 3 basic instincts: the need to feed, the need to feel safe, and the need to conserve energy. Before you spend all day fishing a spot, ask yourself if it meets these 3 criteria. Does your hole have a confirmed food source nearby, like a hard bottom or structure that holds invertebrates? Does it offer protection from predators, like deep water adjacent to cover? Does it allow the fish to access both food and safety without having to travel long distances and burn precious calories? If your spot is just a deep, featureless bowl, it only meets one of those criteria at best: safety in depth. But it lacks food and cover. A true hotspot will check all three boxes. It's a deep channel, safety, that has a rocky edge, cover, and is next to a flat where insects live, food. When you can look at a map and instantly see not just depth, but a complete, efficient habitat, you'll have graduated from simply finding holes to truly finding fish. So, how can you quickly test a spot without committing your whole day to it? Here's a simple but effective strategy. When you arrive at a potential new area, like a deep point or an underwater hump, don't just drill one hole in the deepest spot. Instead, drill a line of 5 or 6 holes. Start on top of the structure in the shallower water and drill a hole every 10 or 15 feet, going down the side and into the deeper water at the base. For example, your holes might be at 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35 feet. Then take your sonar and just drop the transducer in each hole for 30 seconds. Don't even bait your hook yet. You are just prospecting. You are looking for signs of life. Are you marking fish in any of those holes? Are you seeing a better bottom composition at a certain depth? In less than 10 minutes, you can get a snapshot of the entire piece of structure. If you see nothing across all depths, it's probably not worth your time. But if you see a concentration of fish in the 25-foot hole, you know exactly where to focus your efforts. This simple test will save you from a long, cold day of soaking a bait in empty water. So, what's the big takeaway here? The game-changing realization is this: depth is a trap. We've been programmed to chase the deepest number on the screen, but depth by itself is meaningless. The real secret is not the what, but the why. Why is that spot deep? Is it just a random hole, or is it part of a larger system, an old river channel, a structural edge, a complex habitat? The moment you stop looking for holes and start looking for these systems, everything changes. You'll begin to see your lake not as a flat map with contour lines, but as a three-dimensional world with neighborhoods, highways, and restaurants for fish. The most shocking part is that the very best spots are often hiding in plain sight, completely ignored by the crowds who are all piled up on that one big, obvious, and usually empty basin in the middle of the lake. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this pulls back the curtain on winter bream fishing for you. If it did, do me a favor and hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. Now I have a question for you, and I want you to be honest in the comments. What's one spot on your home lake that you've always fished because it was deep, that you now realize is probably a useless trap?